Welcome to the tokenized economy. Here is today's explainer on global tokenization regulation. So, for the last few days, we've been digging into one of the most critical parts of tokenization, regulation. But we're not working at it as a roadblock. We're treating it as the defining force for how these new markets actually grow and take shape. So let's jump in and see how different parts of the world are writing the rulebook for this new financial era. All right, today we're putting all the pieces together. Here's the game plan. We'll kick things off by framing that core tension between the tech and the rules. Then, I'm going to introduce you to a really powerful way to think about this, something we call the regulatory stack. From there, we'll take a tour of the very different approaches in the US, Europe, and the APAC region. And finally, we'll look at how these very different paths might just be leading to the exact same place. So, let's start with the big picture. For the longest time, the whole conversation around tokenization was just about the tech. Could we do it? Could we tokenize stocks, bonds, funds? But as the industry has gotten more mature, one thing has become incredibly clear. And this right here, this just nails the real challenge. The technology to create these digital assets isn't some far-off concept anymore. It's here, it works, and it's solid. The real limiting factor, the thing that's actually setting the pace for big-time adoption, is regulation. That's the puzzle that the entire financial world is trying to solve right now. Now, to really get a handle on how different places are trying to solve that puzzle, it really helps to have a mental model. So instead of seeing regulation as this giant, scary wall, it's way more helpful to think of it as a system, or what we can call a regulatory stack. What I love about this is how it boils down an incredibly complex problem into three simple, fundamental questions. First, you've got the foundation, asset classification. You have to ask, what is this thing? Is it a security, a commodity, something totally new? Next, you move up to the cash layer. How does value actually move around on chain? What do we legally call money in this new world? And then finally, at the very top, you have market structure. Who's allowed to own the asset? Who gets to be an intermediary? And how do we enforce ownership rights? I promise you, every single regulator on the planet is wrestling with these three layers. Okay, with that stack in mind, let's look at our first case study and see how it's being built out in the United States. Their approach? You could probably best describe it as a careful, step-by-step evolution. So the US model is really defined by having multiple, powerful regulators. Think the SEC and the CFTC, each kind of ruling their own territory. Now, instead of writing a brand new rulebook from scratch, the strategy is to take existing laws, some of which are decades old, and apply them to this new tech. They do this with tools like special exemptions and official guidance. What you get is a system that literally evolves in real time, adapting and changing right alongside the innovation itself. Now let's hop across the Atlantic to Europe, which has taken a totally different path. They're not just trying to adapt old laws, they're aiming to build a massive, unified framework from the ground up. And Europe's groundbreaking answer is MiCA, the Markets in Crypto Assets Regulation. This creates a single harmonized rulebook for the entire EU. It clearly defines what different assets are and who can handle them. And maybe most importantly, it lets companies licensed in one country passport their services to all the others. The whole philosophy here is powerful and simple. Establish total clarity before you try to scale up. So here's the crucial trade-off, right? The US model's biggest strength is its incredible flexibility to adapt on the fly. But the challenge is that it can feel fragmented and you don't always have immediate clarity. Europe, on the other hand, gives you that predictability that big institutions just love, but it might come at the cost of being a little less nimble, especially in these early days of experimentation. We're really looking at two very different answers to the exact same problem. And that brings us to our third distinct model, which you can see across the APAC region. Now, this approach is different from both the US and Europe. It's really focused on controlled, regulator-led innovation, especially for the big institutional players. Singapore is the perfect example. The Monetary Authority of Singapore, the MAS, is actively driving this whole thing with its famous Project Guardian. And this isn't just theory. They're enabling live, real-world tokenization pilots for bonds, funds, and foreign exchange with global giants. This lets them test the actual plumbing of a tokenized system, while keeping the whole experiment contained and very closely watched. Then you've got Hong Kong, which is aggressively trying to become a top-tier, regulated digital asset hub. And they're not just talking about it, they're backing it up with action, like the government issuing its own tokenized green bond. This isn't just a test. It's a huge signal to the world that they are serious about building a real, functioning market, but one that operates within very clear regulatory guardrails. And let's take a look at Japan. They've gone with a highly structured, legal-first approach. Japan's laws specifically recognize security tokens, and they've set up rules that give traditional players, like banks, a really strong and defined role in this new ecosystem. The goal here is pretty clear: create absolute legal certainty, which is exactly what you need to attract that big, risk-averse institutional money. So, what's the common thread that really ties this APAC model together? Well, it's not a single framework like in Europe, and it's not based on broad legal interpretation like in the US. Instead, the whole philosophy is a laser focus on specific, high-value use cases that are tested in these controlled sandbox environments. It's a really pragmatic, use case-driven way to build the future. So, we've got these three totally distinct models: that step-by-step evolution in the US, a unified framework in Europe, and this controlled innovation in APAC. On the surface, they seem so different, right? But here's the wild part. Despite all the different paths, they are all moving toward the same destination. So what does that really mean? Where is all of this actually heading? What's the single biggest insight we can pull from comparing these different global strategies? This is the most important takeaway of this entire explainer. Tokenization isn't just a technology shift. It is, at its core, a regulatory transformation of financial markets. The technology is just the catalyst. It's what's forcing a global rethink of how we classify assets, how we move value, and how we structure our markets for the 21st century. And this quote just captures the essence of this global shift perfectly. Every major financial center is working to build the rails for this new economy. And just like it says, while the paths are different, the destination is shared: a financial system that is more digital, more programmable, and more integrated than ever before. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer. Be sure to subscribe for more deep dives into blockchain, tokenization, and financial markets. And hey, we really want to hear from you, so please drop any questions or topics you'd like us to cover in the comments below.